Welcome, Climate Viewers. My name is Jim Lee from ClimateViewer News. It's December 21st, 2017. I hope that everybody's having a wonderful Christmas and Hanukkah or whatever your holiday season may be. We're here today with Andrew Johnson to talk about his book, Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed, Hidden Evidence, Disguised Plans. But before we do that, I want to give you guys a reminder that I will be attending the 21st conference on planned and inadvertent weather modification. Ooh, I got an echo in here. Hold on, let me close the YouTube in the background. All right, so I will be attending the 21st conference on planned and inadvertent weather modification in Austin, Texas on January 9th through the 11th. I hope you guys will continue to support me, because I have received some overwhelming support from you guys. Climate viewers, I appreciate you. Appreciate you. We're going to change the world down there by spreading our message directly to the meteorologists, the heads of state, and all the aggravating people who have chastised you from afar. I'm going there to represent you, and I will represent you well. That being said, today we're going to be talking about climate change and global warming and the myths associated with them, and hopefully be able to give you a bigger perspective of this whole climate change thing. There are so many people scratching their heads. Shout out to Michael Logan, Milky Way Weekly in the chat room. Appreciate you guys being with me this evening. Mr. Andrew Johnson, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book.
Oh, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Jim, to speak to you and your listeners and subscribers. Yeah, well, I've been interested in the climate change issue, the propaganda, since about the early 1990s. And I mean, I remember being in my geography classes, and we did the basics of weather, and learn about occlusions and types of cloud cover and this sort of thing, and depressions and cyclones and anticyclones. And our teacher talked about, there was a change sort of in some of the thinking. And I think when I was at school, which was sort of in the 70s and 80s, it was meant to be an ice age coming, and I think
I remember that.
Yeah, everyone's going to prepare for the next ice age. But then I think by the sort of early 90s, this new story of global warming had come about. And then I think it was 1991 or 1992, we had a very interesting documentary that was broadcast here on the British Channel 4, which was a channel that had advertising at that time, in other words, not BBC. And it was called the Greenhouse Conspiracy. And that documentary basically, sort of took apart some of the problems with these carbon dioxide based scam that was unfolding at that time. And that's when I really started to take an interest in how this was developing. But I think probably through the mid 90s, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. And, I followed bits and pieces, but it was really, I think, only in about 2004. So we're probably talking over 10 years later. I think it was 2004, where I started to notice these trails, and I'd got broadband internet by then. And I know you've written a lot about the chemtrail issue. I looked at some of your pages on that, which I was very interested in.
And I really appreciate you mentioning me in your book.
Well, I did, yes, because I thought your website was absolutely brilliant. And it was also, to me, quite refreshing because, I started off in 2004. I saw the trails, I'd heard people on Coast to Coast, the US talk show. And I'd listened to Cliff Carnicom, listened to him a few times. And then there was William Thomas, who wrote a book called Chemtrails Confirmed. I think that was in the year 2000. He wrote that book around about then. I didn't have a copy of that book. But basically, so I'd started doing, as many had started doing years before me, photographing the trails when I saw them. But what I think at that time began to concern me particularly was the grids. These grids of trails, and
Yeah.
and that's what puzzled me greatly. And I soaked in a lot of the stuff about the toxic spray and the barium and aluminium and those accounts. Um, and I wasn't really sure what to make of them. I wouldn't say that I believed them. I wouldn't say I disbelieved them. I didn't go into a mad panic. I did, for example, create some leaflets with some pictures of the grids on, and I got like a few thousand printed, and I used to give a few out to people when I went to meetings or things like this, and then people would get them from me from my website,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. I just should give people a little bit about my background. My background is, I'm not a climatologist or anything like that. I did a degree in computer science and physics. I graduated in 1986, and then went into software engineering. I was mainly doing real-time software, but I did quite a lot of different bits of software over the years, and worked in that for 20 years. Then I got into education, and I was sort of teaching at college, doing a little bit of maths and mainly computing subjects in the early 90s. And then I ended up getting part-time work with the Open University, what I currently work for. It's a UK-wide university. We give tuition to students who are working at home. A lot of it's web-based now, of course. But the Open University has been in the UK, been going in the UK since 1969. I think it was founded. And I've worked for them as a tutor in computing subjects for since 2002. So, but all this stuff that I'm talking about has nothing to do with the OU. They don't know I do this really because it's all part time, all that stuff. So that's a bit about my background. So, yeah, I'm not a climatologist. I'm not an expert on the weather, but I know the basics. I know. Do you need a meteorologist to
You
tell you
don't
what
need
to
a
make?
degree in this stuff to understand it. You just need to be a little bit dedicated to understanding it.
Right. And so I was so going back to my thread, by 2005 I started looking at these grids, and I took a picture that's sort of interwoven in the cover of the book of this orange trail of, orange grid of trails, which was taken near sunset in June. It was June the 10th, 2005, and it was right outside my window over the
Mm-hmm.
city of Derby. And I was this kind of just thought, right, what is this? And so I wrote to the local authorities, and which is the Civil Aviation Authority. This was sometime later, actually, not immediately when I took the picture. And I thought, well, they've surely got to know what planes created these grids, And I tried to get answers on that and didn't really get any answers. And so, what I think struck me was that there were various people saying that we needed to solve all these environmental problems, but nobody seemed to be sort of really properly talking about this air pollution, these trails, which some days, would form a complete blanket of cloud over where I was, and you basically, it all hazed over, and the temperature would change and go down, and I thought, well, this is affecting the weather, but why is nobody talking about this seriously? I mean, gets an occasional mention, and I knew that the carbon dioxide thing was a scam. I knew that didn't account for all of the warming, and I knew that the science was flawed, and that the measurements that they were claiming, as accurate, couldn't possibly be as accurate as they were claiming. And for example, I'd heard about the medieval warming period, where in the UK, for example, we were growing grapes, and we don't grow them here now. I think you might get one or two right in the southern part of England where they can be grown, but certainly not where I live. And there's no, we're not known for vineyards here at all. But yet this was known in medieval times and in later times. And this appears to be tied in with the Maunder minimum, which is this reduced
Solar
sunspot
cycle.
count. Right. So there was a reduced sunspot count for, I think, 70 years, I think. forget the exact figures. So, you know, and I've always had an interest in astronomy, which very rarely comes up in discussions of climate change. Nobody talks about astronomy.
And it's insane. If you mind if I jump in here, and it's insane to me because we have this thing called the Electric Universe community. And the Electric Universe, thunderbolts.org or Thunderbolts, anyway, you'll find it. We were trying to understand that electricity and the sun obviously play a greater role in climate and how it changes than obviously aerosols, because where does the heat come from? It comes from the sun. So if the sun decides to turn down its dial and put out less energy, no matter how many aerosols we put in the air, reflective or insulating, we're still going to get colder. And that's the thing that these geoengineering scientists that I fear the most about them is that when we see things like this is ship tracks. Most people only talk about chemtrails. But what I have up on the screen here, you mentioned real-time software. I do real-time software as well. This is ClimateViewer.org, and you can see I have up the California fires and the NASA MODIS Terra 367 band. And what it does is it highlights ship tracks, and you can see. I want you guys to see this. These are the ship tracks with the 367 band. Okay. Now you can barely make those out in there. Same screen, same image. This is natural, what most people see with their naked eye. And then when I turn on the 367 band, magically, they have a sensor on the satellite which can detect ship tracks inside of marine stratocumulus banks. So what's interesting about this photo is this area right here, where there ain't a damn cloud coming over California. And while everybody talks about every reason under the sun for why California has no rain, nobody talks about overseeding. And overseeding is a thing that has been recently discussed at the CalWater 2015 study, where ship tracks and chemtrails are a serious problem because when we put so many aerosols in the sky, we can actually shut off precipitation. So climate change has many different ugly faces, but I like to be concerned about the ones that are affecting us today, not off in the future. And that's what I do, you know, at ClimateViewer.com is, you know, obviously pollution, propaganda, and privacy, things that affect you today. And we're really concerned about these things because, you know, like you were talking about, all of this false agenda is trying to lead us to these mega regions.
That's right. That's right.
Like Agenda 21, Agenda 2030.
I later found out, you know, and I was kind of sort of aware of it, and I became quite suspicious of the environmental movements. We have, of course, Greenpeace being one of the big ones. And I'd been a member of Greenpeace, you know, and I thought these were the good guys, you know, and they were genuinely trying to sort out some of the environmental problems. But when I wrote to them about these, you know, what have become called chemtrails or persistent jet trails, whatever you want to talk, you know, however you want to call them, they weren't interested.
I call them plane farts.
Yeah, plane farts if you want. Why not? You know.
Why not?
And, as good a name as any. And they weren't interested, and I became, you know, they didn't even send me any literature, you know, or anything. And so I became suspicious of them. And I think, it was later that I found out about Agenda 21. That came a few years later, actually, relatively recently, but I'd heard rumblings and bits and pieces. But I realized that I think before we started recording, you know, we were talking about the control agenda and how they basically came up with this carbon credit scheme. You know, and I knew that was nothing to do with actually solving the problem. It was clearly had some other purpose. It wasn't meant to be solving the environmental problems.
That's right. It's simply about control. And it's about monetization of that control, because the carbon tax, carbon credit is the universal monetary unit that the technocrats were talking about. And technocracy wanted to monetize energy. And what is the universal monetary unit in energy?
By that time, I'd realized, by the time that I was looking at the trailing issue, I'd realized that the issue that not many people seem to focus on is one of pollution-free energy sources. And I don't just mean pollution-free energy sources, I mean fuel-less energy sources. In other words, free energy.
Yeah.
And
And I think we'll
very
get there.
interested in.
I think we're getting there, but let's
are.
stay on this chemtrail thing for a second, because I got something up on the screen I want to share with you.
That's what I later found out. The free energy is what this another thing which this is all about. So that it's a flip side of the control agenda.
It certainly is.
Going back to the trailing issue, I wasn't happy with the answers that I was getting, and I basically put all this in the book. Just to say what I put in the book and talk about that, and it's available for free download. Everyone that's listening, you can get free PDF. Only the paperback version is to cut, and the ebook version. I've done the ebook version. You can get the ebook version cheaply. The PDF is free, and the paperback is on Amazon relatively cheaply.
And the links for the book is in the details for this video. I will be sharing this around on my social media and website as well. And what I want you guys to know about this chemtrail problem, this contrail cirrus problem, whichever you prefer, is that it's not a new phenomena. And this is weathermodificationhistory.com. It's one of my websites where we cover this in detail, and because those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
And I find this one particularly interesting because of the date. And it says 1948 on it. Mystery of the Point Augusta Sky Trails. This is 1958. Jet Trails, Dim Sun, Palm Springs Gripes.
This is true, and in fact, I put a couple of these in the book. The earliest I got was 1942. It's not. Put it this way: it's not meant to be geoengineering or anything like that. But it was somebody very kindly gave me this book about clouds, and it had some contrail images. And as I say, this book was originally published in 1926 because it was about clouds, and then they updated it, I think, in 1942, and it's got some circular contrails in it. So I was quite intrigued that these were some of the earliest pictures that I'd seen of contrails, which
on the propeller planes.
Right.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, like, they want the guys who debunk this stuff, they want to pretend like that means by default that this is not any kind of controlled thing, and that it's
right.
It's not even an issue. And
we can talk a little bit about that, because there was quite an interesting thing that I found out while I was putting the book together, and involving some of the people that are talking about this on the various websites. People like Dane Wigington, for example, we could mention him later on maybe, but Mick West, who runs this Metabunk site. Because what I'd done is I'd done my own investigation of the trailing. I want to go on to that first, really, because of my background with software and stuff. And because I hadn't had any answers about how these grids were created. Going back to that thing I said a few minutes ago about the grid and it forming over my house, and me asking the appropriate authorities, what planes made this grid, please? Can you tell me? What data do you have on your systems? And they couldn't tell me. And I think it was a year or 2 years after that happened over my house, I came across this thing which was called an SBS1, and it was about $800. It was about £500 or whatever that converts to in dollars, probably $700 perhaps. And well, that's a bit much. And what it would basically do is pick up the ADS-B signals from aircraft that were passing overhead and put that on your laptop screen. As a,
pretty cool. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Right, of course you are. And of course, this was in 2006 or 2005, so it's 12 years ago. And I think it was in 2010 that I ended up getting one of these. It wasn't that thing. It was called an AirNav radar box, and it cost me about $600. Wasn't cheap. And it allowed me to see what planes were flying over my house. And it was a little box that was about the size of a three CD cases stacked up, and plug it into your laptop with a USB, stick the aerial in my attic, in my loft, and I could watch the trails appear on the screen, go outside with a high zoom camera. I had a Canon SX20, which was 20 times optical zoom back in 2010. And I could photograph the planes, see if they were trailing. But this was a real pain because I couldn't run this for very long. The software or the laptop itself was unreliable, so I couldn't. In other words, my goal was to leave this thing running, get some photographs of trails, and then marry the two up. I couldn't really do that very easily back in 2010. But 3 years after that, I came across, I was thinking, I bought what was called a Raspberry Pi, which is a credit card size computer. Many people sold about 5 million now worldwide, probably more than that actually, and there's been new variants. But I realized that it's a low power thing. It was cheap, it was like $35 or something. And I could maybe put this AirNav radar box onto the Raspberry Pi and track the aircraft and leave that running. And then I could use my laptop for other purposes because I wanted to use this laptop for.
That's a great idea. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm building, but I'm working on something called a ClimateViewer, and it's to track weather warfare. And I'm going to put the unit in my backyard, and it's going to broadcast live to the map that I was showing earlier, the ClimateViewer 3D thing. So the idea is it's kind of like Weather Underground, but it's sensing atmospheric aerosols. It's got an all-sky camera, and it does rain samples in real time so that we can detect weather warfare on a global scale. That's a great idea. I was already going to put electromagnetic sensing on there because I want to be able to detect ELF, VLF, and that sort of thing. Putting in the signals would be great.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you get basically what I was leading on to is that I found out that with the Raspberry Pi, which was really cheap, some clever person, not me, had you can get a digital TV receiver dongle, USB dongle, for about $15, $20, and it's basically a software-defined radio.
Yep, that's WebSDR. I'm talking to ham radio guys. We're setting up the WebSDR to do the low frequency. The problem is you got to have to do low frequency listening. You have to have a huge antenna.
Right.
That's a coil antenna.
Before we go into that whole topic, I mean, this was 1.09 gigahertz was ADS-B, I think, is where the signals come from. I think it's 1.09 gigahertz.
Yeah, so I mean, you still have to have a frequency scanner. You need something like an oscilloscope. You need there's plenty of different already off-the-shelf sensors for Raspberry Pi. I've seen hundreds of them.
Right. So you whether you use that or not, but what I did was I got this cheap USB dongle, and that was able to fulfill the role of the £400 box that I previously had. And not only that, I could customize the software because the ADS-B decoder was written in C, which was the language I was most familiar with. And so I was able to get the Raspberry Pi to draw a track and save it to a PNG file. So I could get it to dump tracks of the aircraft over my house every half an hour.
Yep.
And then I can also, very something not sophisticated as your thing by the sounds of it, but the Raspberry Pi camera had come out, which was, again, fairly cheap. So I could take a picture of the sky every minute or every 30 seconds and get the Raspberry Pi to generate time-lapse movies at the end of the day and upload them to my server, basically, because I built about 6 of these kits and I put them in operation around the UK with people that I got in contact with. So they were running these trackers, getting the planes going over and photographing the sky, creating a time-lapse, and that was all that data had been uploaded to my Raspberry Pi every day, and I ran this for about 6 months. So I had about 300,000 observations of planes and the sky, which I then worked through over a period of time, and then I put that all into a database. So I was able to basically see, or try and see, and it wasn't very easy, if there was a correlation between the number of aircrafts that were going over the location in a given period of time and the number of trails that were photographed at that time. And my other goal was to see if I could get a grid forming and film that grid forming with a time lapse, and then get the ADS-B data from the aircraft, which allegedly made that grid. Now, and I did get one grid formation which I filmed, and that was in November 2013. I go through this all in the book. And but in the ADSB tracking information, there was no obvious grid on the map. In other words, the grid that I saw in the sky on the images on the time-lapse movie had no analog in the tracking data which had been captured, which had been plotted out on a chart. And when I did the correlation, I couldn't see that on days that had lots and lots of trails, we had any more aircraft. So I came to the conclusion that the days where we had more trails, because I'm sure most people that are listening to this and have watched this issue, if it's like here, you can have days where you get completely blue sky, you don't see any trails at all, short, you don't even see short ones, you see nothing. And you get some days where you see a few short trails, and then you get other days where you see the sky is full of trails, they persist for like half an hour, whatever. And that's what I was interested in, why you get this variation. These days that I gathered was to try and work out what was going on, but it was basically inconclusive, and I came to the conclusion that actually if you ran the statistics on the database that I created, and it's all on my website if anybody wants to look at it, or I can send them it. I came to the conclusion. Are you still there? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, certainly.
That's all right. It's just all quiet. I came to the conclusion that there may have even been a slight decrease in the numbers of planes on the days when we got more trails. If the way I ran the stats one way, that gave a slight decrease. And again, I put this all into a report. It's not in the book in that level of detail.
I want to see your charts. So you're going to have to email those to me. I'm going to pour through that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can send you the link. So that in other words, that trail investigation that I did lasted a period of basically from 2010 to 2014. I think was when I finished it really, and the people that were interested in chemtrails took no interest. I had a group, an email list.
Oh, they're not interested in the science, as far as I could tell. I've tried for 4 years. They want you to give them the short version.
Well, of course, and I mean that's why I found that some of your videos refreshing, because you had basically encountered the same sorts of things that I had. In other words, you were showing things like in documents that the trailing has been around for a long time, and certain experiments have been done, and it's in the literature, and people are jumping to conclusions about it.
Well, let's demystify some of this right now. So one of the biggest ones is the discussion about the grids, and everybody always asks me, Jim, how does it work? And it's really not that hard to understand. And when I figured it out, I was like, well, damn, it's like one of those things. So in America, the Federal Aviation Administration has a supercomputer called NextGen. NEXTGEN. And NextGen pretty much puts these planes on highways in the sky. They're rails that they fly on. I'm actually going to be mapping all of these very shortly on ClimateViewer 3D, so you'll be able to see them. And they used to be on ClimateViewer 3D when I had Google Earth as my base map. But Google Earth shut me down. I had to rewrite the entire website. So I'm bringing satellite tracking and ship tracking back, plane tracking back pretty soon. But this is the neat thing. They have this thing on there called the Aviation Environmental Design Tool. Nice. And this is the one that most people don't realize is a real thing, even though I keep talking about it. So AEDT is a software system that models aircraft performance in space and time to estimate fuel consumption, emissions, noise, and air quality consequences. AEDT is a comprehensive tool that provides information to the FAA stakeholders. That's important. It provides information to FAA stakeholders on each of these specific environmental impacts. AEDT facilitates environmental review activities required under NEPA by consolidating the modeling of the environmental impacts in a single tool. So AEDT is a newer version of what used to be called SAGE and a couple other software packages, which together tried to figure out how bad planes were screwing up the environment. So AEDT is the fancy new version. I got a playlist, a YouTube playlist, actually showing the software in motion here, and I've actually. And I won't go into that anyway. Software is fun. So this tool actually allows them to design the environment. It's an aviation environmental design tool. So what are they designing? They are designing clouds. And why are they designing clouds? They're designing clouds that cool the planet instead of heat the planet. And I said to myself, how in the hell could somebody do that? And then I found this doped jet fuel sulfur content. And there's this paper, and it basically says this: apply high fuel sulfur content fuels at aviation cruise altitude and low on takeoff. And they're using biofuels on takeoff to create less carbon black soot around airports to kill less people. Nice. And carbon black soot self-levitates. An Indian Space Organization just found carbon black soot from jet aircraft at 18 kilometers in the atmosphere, which meant specifically that they are destroying ozone, and that black carbon coming out of planes is transporting metals up to the stratosphere. So they're trying to make a jet fuel that can make a cloud that only cools the planet but doesn't destroy ozone and heat the planet. And they do this through jet fuel sulfur doping, and then it gets better. We found patents to prove it. So here's the patents: fuel system for vapor trail control, U.S. patent 9518965, patent number 201303408834, and patent 2011-01-01166. So for all the scientists playing along at home, you pwned. But these FAA guys are basically talking about using two jet fuels in one tank.
Yeah, I saw that.
To address whether they're making clouds or not. So how do they control that? With a supercomputer. And how does the supercomputer make grids in the sky? It routes all the flights. It tells the flights when and where to burn the fuel.
How long has this been in operation, though?
Forms of this have been in operation since flight started, but that's generally how routing goes. And now most of the not with next gen, correct.
Correct.
Next gen's only been in operation the last couple of years. Most of the airport failures. Excuse me.
That's fair enough, but the grid that I photographed was in 2005. Just to give you an example. So
exactly, we've got newspaper articles from 1970 of a congressman standing on top of Vail, Colorado ski resort saying these mountains will always be covered in snow and the airlines will provide it.
Well, I think I think that is also part of as a further level of cover up, which I go into in the book, because and we haven't got onto this yet, but it's important to understand what happened on 9/11 to understand another dimension to this, because I think a lot of what you've mentioned, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and the sorts of things that I saw you listing to kind of put it in a ball, if you will, it tends to be chemical based. It's all to do with chemicals, chemical reactions, and as you said, like carbon black soot, which of course isn't really call it a chemical as such, but it's
an organic compound. Yeah, I mean, we could be scientific if you want, but I mean, yeah, it's a chemical. All of these are chemical trails, just like everybody said.
Right. What I came to realize is that geoengineering is not being done with chemicals alone. That clearly, like the patents you showed, they've got the opportunity to do chemical-based geoengineering, and I mentioned that in the book as well. Obviously, without going to the more obvious ones that started in the 40s, I think, the cloud seeding, the silver iodide. I mentioned Bernard Vonnegut, who was involved with that experiments back then, and all that sort of thing. And then we had, the Charles Hatfield, which was even earlier. I think that was
Oh yeah, Hatfield's one of my favorite stories. But I think what you're referring to is up on the screen right now.
right.
Is ELF able to manipulate the weather? And we're
Absolutely.
talking, yeah. So electromagnetic frequency certainly can manipulate the
But then,
weather,
but then,
especially
then
when you're. Go ahead.
right. But then what happens is, which I also put in the book, is that people just say, "Oh, HARP," and as I mentioned in the book, if somebody talks about chemtrails and you're just talking to somebody who's starting to look at these websites and stuff, you're going to be about two breaths away from them mentioning HARP.
Oh
And,
yeah,
and
definitely.
clearly, I think Bernard Eastland, I think he does talk about, I think he has mentioned geoengineering, but certainly I don't think that's mentioned on the HARP website. Although I did come across an article, you may well know more about this than I do, and your listeners may know more about this than I do, but I did come across an article about HARP where it said they'd managed to actually create a glow in the sky, very tiny glow.
Yeah,
This was
certainly.
actually reported
Um,
in
that's
2011. So,
that's on weathermodificationhistory.com as well,
right,
and it'll be HARP makes plasma cloud in sky. And it's
right,
certainly on. There it is
right.
right there. HARP creates densest artificial plasma cloud. Here, let me blow it up for the people. I'm sorry. I was looking at my other screen. HARP creates densest artificial plasma cloud, November 12th, 2012. And here is a photo of that cloud he's talking about. Please continue.
Yeah, so that I came across that. So yeah, that's got to be geoengineering. Okay, it's the little plasma cloud. It's not, like a tornado or a hurricane or anything like that. But it is, it does, essentially, it's a proof of concept that we can see in the white world. Now,
Correct.
um, I think what people have to understand for a lot of issues, not just climate change, is there is a black world. There is a black world, and they have a whole different set of technology. You won't really find any websites about it that have got any verifiable information. The science is different. The physics is different to what we know in the white world. It's essentially a type of ether physics, as some call it. And we kind of have that in the white world a little bit because, like, I would contend that quantum theory is kind of like excuse the word, but a bastardized version of ether physics. Um,
I would tend to agree with you. And, my father was a nuclear missile launch technician, and we talk a lot about stuff that he had seen in the 70s that most people wouldn't believe today.
right.
And most people are familiar, most people who are woke are familiar with the nuclear, rocket propelled, the magnetohydrodynamics and all of these, really fancy things that, they say don't exist, but suddenly the budget's always there for it.
But,
Um,
right. I mean, I'll give you an example because we're going slightly off the topic, but I think it's important for people to really understand that the black world is real, and the guys that run the black world basically run the planet. And all this talk about you know um, carbon dioxide and putting stuff in the atmosphere and chemtrails, those basically all that's Hegelian dialectic. Um, it's not it's not the real deal. Now, I got in touch with somebody a few years ago called Edgar Fouché. Now, Edgar Fouché showed me documents that essentially proved that he worked in Area 51 in 1979. Now, there's a whole set of interviews on my website that people can read if they want to, or
cool.
listen to if they want.
And your
But
website is
the thing I want,
checktheevidence.com, right?
yeah, but what I wanted to mention is that he became quite well known for a short period of time in 1998 as a whistleblower, saying that he had basically inside information about the Black World and one of the Black projects, which was the development of this advanced craft called the TR-3B. Now, I won't go
The
into all the details.
black triangle, right?
Correct. I won't go into all the details of that, but one of the things he mentioned in his 1998 presentation at the International UFO Congress, and it's on YouTube, everyone can go and watch it, was something called quasi-crystals. Now, I didn't come across this lecture until 2004. And when I heard this thing quasi crystals, I thought that's clearly nonsense. I've never heard of quasi crystals. he's just making it up. But I went and, of course, looked that up. And I very quickly found a paper at MIT about quasicrystals. And Edgar Fouché had said that in the white world, quasicrystal research was frowned upon because it was one of those things that was a bit like the early days of lasers, where people couldn't really, they didn't really know what they could do with a laser. And and it was like that with quasicrystals. They didn't really know what they could do with quasicrystals. But then what I found out later was that a guy called Daniel Shechtman, he won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2011 to work on quasicrystals. And there's now quite a lot of information about quasicrystals coming out. But Edgar Fouché was talking about these in 1998 because he said they were essentially involved in part of the materials that were in the construction of this black aircraft, the TR-3B.
So the quasicrystals have something to do with that TR-3B. Like in the surface of it, like it's an anti-radar. It diffracts radar in a way that that's what you're going at. That makes sense to me. Go ahead. I mean, that I didn't know that till just now, and that's where I went.
Yeah, exactly. It's used in stealth technology. That's what he basically said in 1998. Now, he didn't understand all the ins and outs of it. He was basically a cryptographics technician. You'd have to watch the whole thing. But there's a number of things like that which I've come across over the years, which show me that the black world is real. I mean,
certainly.
That's what Eisenhower warned about. And it's all this stuff in the white world. It's just basically lower tier stuff. And the black world knows all of that, and they know a lot more besides.
Wow. Dude, I'm going to be up all night reading this crap. Why did you do this to me? All right, let's go back to climate change. Don't ever do that to me again. Oh, my goodness. I mean, I'm thinking piezoelectrics as well.
So I think basically what happened was that we've mentioned Tesla, I think, already, and you had the ELF thing up. We for example, remember that Tesla said that he developed this death ray.
Yeah. Let's do that too. I have that one as well. Hold on, check this.
I don't know a lot about that.
There it is. Look at this. I'm doing a report on directed energy weapons, HARP, the Russian woodpecker, and modifying the jet stream. That's going to set the record straight for once and for all.
Right.
And this is part of it. Tesla's great invention to blow up ships, and you see the death ray in action there. Here's another one. Pretty epic looking. Tesla's tidal wave to make war impossible. Pretty epic stuff. And then finally, the one we were looking at earlier, about ELF waves and steering the jet stream.
Sure. So, I mean, we see these things on the internet and they look incredible. And, but even if you read Tesla's Tesla's biography, there's a book by Mark Cypher called The Wizard Tesla. I forget the exact title, unfortunately, but you can find it on Amazon and stuff. And he even mentions this alleged death ray in the book there, and I was somewhat surprised about that. And of course, there's going to be hype about that. There's going to be hype, and I think Tesla was well in with the U.S. authorities. He was friends with them at that time, so they're going to big up, that they've got this technology, and it's going to do all these things. But what has happened to that? Tesla died in 1943. What happened to all that technology? We know that, for example, the Wardenclyffe Tower was destroyed before the project was finished. What happened to all that technology? And I would argue that if you look at what happened to Wilhelm Reich in the 1950s, and Wilhelm Reich was looking into orgone energy, and he was doing experiments with cloudbusters, as we mentioned briefly before we started the recording. And basically, I think that technology was already known to the military at that time, or if it wasn't known to them, they basically did their own version of it. And I've come to the conclusion that they're already using that technology and have been using it to modify the weather.
Yeah, they certainly are, and I fully agree with that. That's why I'm doing a report on this right now, and this has a great quote in it. I'll bring it up real quick. it explains exactly how it works. And that's why, shout out to Dominic Barama, my homeboy, my brother from another mother in Canada. We work on weathermodificationhistory.com together. Dominic goes and digs up these old newspapers and photoshops them, and I read them, and I fall out of my seat, just overjoyed.
Right.
So this one's great. In the case of the winter of 1976 to 77, the Soviets have managed to establish terrestrial electrical resonance and then learned how to establish relatively stable and localized ELF magnetic fields, which were able to hamper or divert the jet stream flow in northern hemisphere. And then it goes on to say how. Dr. Michalowski postulates that the Soviet ELF signals are pulses on a frequency of 31.5 hertz and have caused giant standing wave troughs in the Rocky Mountains between Alberta and New Mexico and another through the eastern United States. This is what we're seeing in the sky when people see these rib bones. They're called Lee waves, gravity waves. These rib bones in the sky are caused by standing waves.
I agree with you. I haven't put the standing wave stuff in the book, but I've basically put a selection of weather anomaly photographs, which to me show that technology is in use to modify the weather. I think you can see this with the weather anomaly photographs, of which there are thousands now.
Oh, there are hundreds of thousands of them. And I wanted to take it a step further. You had mentioned reporting this stuff. There's a guy out there. His name is I won't drop names. Flightpollutionradar.com. This guy actually went and took what you were talking about, the ground level observation, mixed it with the flight tracking data, and you can get a little bit of climate information all in one, and you do a report. And he's got a report map. It's pretty awesome. I would suggest everybody check that out. New environmental app to register worldwide flight pollution and weather modification. Improved app version 2 now released. And I know 9 other guys that are like me who have maps and are trying to get this data together. It goes even crazier that NASA, after I went and spoke at the EPA hearing about this, saying we need more observational data, we need sensors, yada, yada, NASA started the Globe Observer program, where they made an app that's kind of like the Pokemon Go app. You can go out your backyard, take a picture of your chemtrails, say what kind you got, how much of the sky percentage-wise is covered, hit submit, and it puts a dot on a map, and scientists are studying it right now because guess what? The airline industry is in deep doo-doo with the carbon tax cabal. And now that they know their cirrus clouds are trapping up to 5,000 times.
All that stuff is a sideshow, because when you look into
it is a sideshow.
You don't need any of this stuff. We've known about anti-gravity technology since the 50s, so we don't need to burn fossil fuels to create flight. This is really what's at the end of my book, and we essentially know that because of what happened on 9/11. Because what people don't know about 9/11 is the weather factor. People will say about 9/11, clear blue sky, beautiful day, 70 degrees, whatever it was. That's pretty much all they know about the weather on 9/11, because they weren't told about Hurricane Erin, which was right off the coast of New York. And it had gone there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the outer bands of Hurricane Erin were going on to Cape Cod, just as the events of 9/11 were unfolding. And that hurricane, which had been traveling in a straight line for 4 days up from Bermuda, then made a right-hand turn on the 12th and moved out towards Newfoundland. And again, you can go into the archives, you can check this in any of the hurricane data centers, and this is what it did. And basically, we can go into as much detail as you'd like, but the reason why that hurricane was there, what is the reason? There are 2 possible reasons. One is it was a coincidence. So why did this hurricane move? Why were its movements coincident with the events of 9/11? So it was a coincidence. The other possible explanation is it wasn't a coincidence. So if it wasn't a coincidence, why was this storm system just off the coast of New York, just as the events of 9/11 were unfolding there, and of course at the other locations? The answer is to do with energy. And you have to understand that what happened to the World Trade Center was to do with energy. And this is all documented meticulously in Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? So I don't really need to go into that in detail here because all of that information is available online as well. And there's various
and you said that was where did the towers go? And her name was
Dr. Judy Wood.
I'm going to check it out.
Dr. Wood for 10 years. And so basically, a little bit of other information, and it all ties together. The events of 9/11 tie together the climate change scam and the environmental scam and the energy scam. All of that is tied together, and I've tried to illustrate that in the end of my book to try and put sort of meat on what I'm saying. But the other thing I will mention, because it's very important that people understand this and check this out to check that what I'm saying is true, is that we found that one of the other researchers that was working with us, who's called Stephen E. Jones. Stephen E. Jones invited me to join his Scholars for 9/11 Truth group because, as I said earlier on, I work for the Open University. I haven't got a PhD or even a master's degree, but I have worked for the Open University for a number of years. So I joined his Scholars group at his invitation in 2005. And I've written about that in a separate book, actually. I won't go into that here. But why I'm mentioning him specifically was after about a year of him being familiar with him, what he was doing, we realized he was promoting a false explanation for what happened to the World Trade Center. And he was talking about thermite and bombs being put in and all this, that, and the rest of it. But we then found out that this fellow, Stephen E. Jones, was involved with cold fusion research in the 1980s. And in fact, it was him that was instrumental in downplaying the very significant work of Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, who'd been looking at this electrolysis experiment, which basically under certain conditions which weren't well understood and still aren't that well understood, it was producing more energy out of the experiment than was going into it by certain measures, in fact most measures. And this experiment was reproduced many times by a number of different groups, including a group at Texas A&M University. So the very guy that was basically involved with energy research in this unusual phenomenon, which became called cold fusion, but is more correctly called low energy nuclear reactions. He was involved in LNR or CANR, sometimes called that.
Yeah.
He was involved in promoting this false, and we knew it was a false explanation. We confronted him with this by email, and he didn't really have a decent response. And I've written this up at great length in my other research, so we know that this is true. So this essentially, to me at least, if nobody else, proved that there was a very important connection between the events of 9/11 and the events of
Hurricane Erin. Can I ask you something? I have a slide up on the screen, and this is for everybody playing along at home. Mm-hmm. These storms have an enormous amount of energy. Are you saying that this 200 kilotons of TNT per second is the energy that they used from Hurricane Erin somehow related to what they did? What do you exactly? help me understand? Help me understand the Hurricane Erin and the towers.
How much detail do you want to go into? Because I can.
Let's keep it on the surface and let people read about it in the book.
Okay. Well, basically, what Dr. Wood established from her research, and I was basically on the sidelines while she was going through all of this and finding all of this out, because I had a little bit of knowledge of the guy that we mentioned before we started recording. You don't remember his name. That guy's John Hutchison.
Hutchinson, you the man. That's him, John Hutchinson. Thank you very much.
To go back to what you were saying earlier on, he was experimenting with microwaves.
Correct.
And he was experimenting with electrostatic fields from a Van de Graaff generator, or he was using a Tesla coil. There's that name again. And he was mixing in magnetic fields. And
that's right.
By mixing these different types of energy field together and varying the frequencies in certain ways, which he was using 2 tons of equipment to do.
His van, you guys go look up John Hutchison on YouTube. If his videos are still floating around there, he ran off into the woods and quit doing what he's doing for personal safety reasons. He's still there.
Yep, I had an email from him the day before yesterday.
Yeah, he's still doing his thing. He's just laying low, but
he's laying low.
That's an epic man.
So
genius.
He is, and people say he's a fraud. And then this is, in fact, what happened with me in the 9/11 research when we made this connection. That the work of John Hutchison was relevant to what happened on 9/11 because of this energy issue which we touched on. And this was a real sort of flashpoint, which I've written up at length in my other books, but which are free to download, by the way. And so once you see this connection, you then realize, well, what's the Agenda 21 about? What's this CO2 business about? It's about controlling how we use energy, controlling how we move. So if indeed it is correct, and it is correct, I can tell you that from my own perspective, having studied this for 10 years.
Yep.
The energy factors involved with 9/11, which we've only scratched the surface of, are massively significant. And not only that, they don't want anybody to know about this. And I, for example, can mention Dane Wigington, who I know is lied about this openly. I've got a recording of him lying. I've written a short article.
You just said that. You just said the name of Voldemort. You get a demerit. We shall refer to Mr. Wig as he who shall not be mentioned for the remainder of this. No, I'm kidding. Well, you piss on the guy all you like. I hate him. Go right ahead.
He lied about what Dr. Wood has said in her book. There's this other fellow, Richard Gage, which he was going on with. I know that Dane Wigington, for example, has had a go at G. Edward Griffin. That was, I think, out last year or the year before.
He attacked Mr. Ed Griffin because I went to his conference and he didn't have the balls to attack me. Right. Please continue.
That would fit in with me. So, in other words, you have Dane Wigington, who is putting out false information about geoengineering and chemtrails and methane and all that stuff. He's been doing that for several years. Yes, I don't know who the guy thinks he is, but I do know that he used to work for Bechtel and stuff like that. So, in other words, it becomes very messy very quickly, as you yourself well know, when you start to pick apart and try to make sense of the various arguing parties.
Yes, sir.
And going back to the book, I've tried to sort of distill down some of all of that and make it a bit clearer. And basically end up saying, for example, I don't know exactly what these chemtrails, why they are like they are, but I know it's got something to do with geoengineering and weather modification, and I think it's got something to do with energy. And my conclusion from at least looking at some of the trails is that what's happening and why we're seeing them, at least to some extent, is that they're using some type of energy technology to modify the weather. And because the energy technology isn't in use all the time, they switch it on and off, they redirect it to various places. That then has some type of secondary effect on the appearance of these trails and other related phenomena.
If you don't mind, I'd like to expand on that because I had a conversation with a prominent chemtrail activist the other day, and he had not considered this. And I tried to take the big picture. That's why, that's why I built ClimateViewer 3D was to kind of take a step back and try to see, what all could be affecting this thing that I'm currently looking at. And what shocked me right off the get-go was the number of microwaves worldwide. Up on the screen right now, I have missile defense radars. Black and white markers like this, they are typically in the millions of watts each. Yellow ones are super dual auroral radar network. Let me close this, make this thing flat for the flat earthers out there. There you go, you flat earthers. Anyway, so this is what we're looking at here. That's a lot of damn energy, and this is only what I personally have mapped, and we're talking in the trillions of watts on a global scale, cooking the sky on a daily basis to watch for missiles, as they say. So There are
Yeah.
many factors that aren't even considered. Nobody's ever even thought to consider them.
Right.
And that's why, we do what we do as, the little people, out here trying to figure it out. We connect dots. So for me, I started connecting dots by doing things like, looking at all these radars and going, hey, what is this thing? What is this? Oh, wait, this is a big ass microwave of doom, the Shigaraki middle, upper atmospheric radar. It cooks the sky.
Yeah,
And
that's a fantastic resource that you built there to look at all that data. I mean, that's really incredible. That you've got
you
all
can
that
see them all real time.
information there. It's
So
amazing.
the point of this map and just trying to get a good big picture of the chemtrail issue is nobody ever really considers all the
No,
factors, and the
no.
background aerosols is one of the biggest ones that people miss. I was doing a research paper on I was writing up something on mercury, and
Mm,
mercury over Texas, the levels were, they were like, well, these are what the EPA standards say they should be. Oh, it's 1,000 times higher than that in the air you're breathing.
wow.
So we have days where, at least over the continental United States, where, obviously background aerosols are going to be higher than others. We have days where water vapor is going to be higher than others. And like you said, we're going to have days where there are no clouds at all because clouds
Mm,
just can't form. Um,
mm,
and then we have those other days where, it starts at 10, 7 o'clock in the morning. And it's, for me personally, I'm in South Carolina, magically stops right at the end of the day. And even though it's been cloudy all day long for weeks on end, every night I have starry skies. And I'm scratching my head going, how is this possible? I
yeah.
mean, it's not possible, right? So
Right.
there are many factors to this, one of which is obviously background aerosols like mercury and other metals that come from the ground. And it depends on the place you're at. One of the big ones that I saw was there's a 2,500 square mile methane cloud hanging out over Nevada. And they didn't even know this thing existed till just recently. It's right here. And you look at this thing, there's the satellite image of it. See that
Wow.
big red dot right there?
Mhm.
I mean,
I
this is
see.
the kind of thing that if you're flying chemtrails through the huge methane cloud, might actually affect a couple things, especially with
They do.
transport up and down the plains and all that. I find things like this every single day
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
where,
But if you've got all that
nobody's ever
data collated like that, you're probably the only person that's seeing those correlations because you've got it. You've got that all
correct.
collated. You know,
And that's why I say this is how silly. But I want to get your opinion on this. This is how silly this is. I'm a dude, all right. I did this as a hobby over 7 years, and I'm now taking it pretty damn seriously. If I can put all this stuff together and draw these conclusions from my house
yeah,
in Sumter, South Carolina,
yeah.
with some open source software that I wrote in a little bit of time with no pay, why can they put all these IPCC models together and put all these fusion models like GeoMIP, integrated assessment of geoengineering proposals, billions of dollars thrown at this climate change problem to
That's
model,
right.
model, model?
I agree, and I think the theme of that is that a lot of these groups like that, they have to create a consensus and then support that consensus rather than support a truthful conclusion of what is actually going
Yeah.
on.
It's narrative
That,
building. So
that's
once you're
yeah,
in that
exactly.
narrative,
That's
you can't
exactly what
walk
it
away
is.
from it. I think that's what it
Yeah,
is too.
yeah,
You
and
know,
it
you
happens
you
not,
you
happens not only in geoengineering. It happens in health. It happens in space research. It happens in chemistry and physics. It happens in everything. You build this consensus, and then everyone operates within that consensus. And if they go outside of it, they are literally an outsider, and they don't get funding, they don't get salary.
That's correct.
Um,
And it's a
you
vicious
can't.
cycle that they
It
intend to
is.
keep going for certain.
And the black world and the secret keepers, they're just making all their plans outside of all that system. They have all the technology. As you say, if you can do all of this over a few years, just on your Todd, as we say here, on your own, what can they do? What have they got? What's their technology? You know,
Right.
that's that's
So I went and I did my research on it, and I have a unique perspective on it because I follow the money, I follow the chemicals, I read the geoengineering papers. They say we're going to screw with jet fuel. Guess what? They screwed with jet fuel. So I end up talking about that only as it pertains to Delta Airlines making planes. Of course, I recognize the CIA is probably geoengineering, China's geoengineering, Russia's geoengineering. They've said so. They budgeted for it. They probably are. The CIA asked Alan Robach, a geoengineer, March 2015, if Russia was modifying the weather over America, would we know it? And he replied to the CIA, I think so. So the truth of the matter is, we don't have any way to detect whether somebody is doing rogue geoengineering or not. And that's a national security concern for everybody on the planet. So that's why I proposed a solution, which is based on NMOD, the weather warfare ban of 1978, to actually bring verification to that ban. So we're going to demand transparency, 48-hour notice before you modify the sky. And if you don't, our sensor network will catch you and you just violated NMOD. So I did all this research on jet fuel, and this is where I ended up. I interviewed the head of the FAA, Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, Dr. Rangasai Halthori, and he said we want to make clouds by day, none by night. And that's the official FAA idea. So is this a chemtrail conspiracy anymore, or is this cloud creation and control 101? Because when I got the head of the FAA saying we want more contrail-induced cirrus clouds by day, none by night, and I will bring up the quote if you want to see it yourself, but you can actually go read it right here. Interview with Dr. Rangasai Halthori, Citizen Inquiry for Contrails. That's what the guy said. Download it yourself.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I didn't know that, but
yeah. So that's their official position. And go ahead.
My point is, though, that I think until people like him, including on what happened on 9/11, it's just all relevant to me, because it doesn't matter what he thinks and what he plans to do or suggests or recommends or consults with. Black World will do what it wants. That's the situation, and that's what Eisenhower, I think, became aware of in 1961. That's when he was going on about the military-industrial complex.
I fully agree with you on that, and I think that that's probably where we should kind of wrap this up, because I know by now that we've said enough really interesting things that our friends at the Five Eyes Stone Ghost Network, they have certainly tuned in, got an earful today about their shenanigans. So
I always say to these guys, if I ever think they're listening, just consider whose side you're on, really, and think about the future and what sort of world you want to create and what sort of world you're hoping to maintain. Because once you have free energy for everyone, everything changes. Everything changes.
I fully agree. I fully agree with that statement. So to all our friends at the Aerospace Data Facility and the Utah Data Center, we really appreciate you. Keep us safe. But remember that we are also fighting the good fight over here, and we care about climate change today, not off in the future. So I hope that you guys will check out Andrew's book. His website, again, is checktheevidence.com. The book is Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed: Hidden Evidence, Disguised Plans. Apparently, it's more than just climate change. And Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on today and talking. I could talk to you for another hour easily. I think my wife will probably kick my ass, though. It is Christmas time, and we've actually been trying to make this happen for a couple weeks now.
We finally got it together between us.
I'm glad that we were able to get together and do this, Andrew. This was very fun, and I hope that you guys in the audience learned something today. So what do you guys think about what we were saying here today? Is global warming and climate change just CO2, or does it sound like control to you? Will you let us know in the comments? Please share Andrew's book around. It obviously is loaded with some good material that we all need to be well versed on this topic, because the technocrats are coming for you, and they want to cut off your fire. No burning wood in your stove. You're putting out too much CO2. Those cows are farting too much. Put a plug in their butt. And we really need to get some sanity around climate change, because for me, plastic in the ocean, Pacific garbage patch, benzene in the water, fracked up all day long, and methane clouds of mercury-lined clouds. I'm sick of it all. So let's focus on climate change today by dealing with pollution that we can actually see, taste, breathe, that really affects the lives of people. More people die of diarrhea than climate change. So let's deal with those kinds of situations today. And I think that we will actually have less to worry about in the future. And I keep supporting guys like Andrew and, of course, myself. We're going to keep doing this because, you know, we're the people who really are nosy and have a big mouth. And we kind of put our ass on the line for what we do. I'm sure that you've put your ass on the line many a time, Andrew. And I appreciate what you do. Certainly. And for those guys, you know, they can support me. Again, I am going to the 21st conference on planned and inadvertent weather modification, where I hope to have 3 days of conversations just like the one you heard, where I'm going to go to the head of the National Weather Service and say, we know about every cloud seeding project worldwide. We know how the ionospheric heaters work. We know where they are and why they do what they do. And we think that enough is enough. We want to stop talking about climate change while ignoring the climate changers. So if you guys will support me, I'm going there to film this entire event as much as I can. I've gotten permission from the AMS to do just that. I will be interviewing cloud seeding scientists and geoengineers like Alan Robach, who talked to the CIA. We're going to have a great conversation about that conversation. And unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not.